What happens when the wealthiest people in the room underestimate the wrong man? Can money buy power? Or does true respect come from something deeper? What if the biggest lesson of the night wasn't about wealth, but about character? The Beverly Grand Hotel gleamed under a sea of chandeliers, each crystal reflecting the wealth and status of those in attendance. It wasn't just an auction, it was the event of the year. The elite of society had gathered, not just to bid on rare and luxurious items, but to outshine one another. A silent competition brewed beneath the polite smiles and perfectly tailored tuxedos. Winning a bid wasn't just about purchasing an item, it was about dominance, a display of wealth and power. The ballroom buzzed with murmurs as waiters floated between tables, carrying glasses of aged champagne and delicacies that cost more than a month's rent for most people. The stage stood tall at the front, velvet curtains drawn back to reveal the first treasures of the evening, a collection of rare paintings, vintage jewelry, and a limited edition Rolls-Royce. Ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer's smooth voice carried over the room, welcome to an evening of generosity, prestige, and of course, a chance to own history itself. The audience gave a polite round of applause, though their eyes remained fixed on the stage. Then a shift in the atmosphere, a presence that didn't fit the mold of the evening. Shaquille O'Neal had arrived. The 7-foot basketball legend walked in, not in a tuxedo, but in a simple hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. He moved with the casual confidence of a man who knew he didn't need a suit to command a room. But the crowd didn't see confidence. They saw an outsider. Whispers erupted almost immediately. "Is that really Shaq?" someone murmured. "What's he even doing here?" Another voice scoffed. "Maybe he's just here to take pictures with the guests." Shaq, unbothered, took his seat near the middle of the room, stretching out comfortably. He had seen this kind of crowd before, people who mistook wealth for wisdom, who assumed they knew the worth of every person in the room. A waiter hesitated before offering him a glass of champagne, as if unsure whether he belonged. Shaq simply smiled and took it, his eyes scanning the stage as the auction began. The first item was unveiled, a signed sports jersey from a Hall of Fame athlete. The auctioneer lifted his gavel. "We shall start the bidding at $10,000. Several hands shot up instantly, including Shaq's. But instead of acknowledging his bid, the auctioneer turned to another guest. Shaq raised an eyebrow. He wasn't here just to bid. He was here for something else entirely. A lesson needed to be taught, and by the end of the night, this room would never forget it. The auction continued, but the attention in the room had already shifted. A few tables away from Shaq, 3 of the wealthiest and most arrogant guests in attendance were already whispering among themselves. Bradley Kensington III, a smug real estate mogul with a history of throwing money around to prove his superiority, smirked as he swirled his glass of wine. "Looks like someone took a wrong turn." Sitting beside him, Victoria Hastings, a high society socialite draped in diamonds and privilege, let out a soft, mocking laugh. "Poor guy. He probably thinks this is a charity dinner." Elliot Brooks, an art collector known for his condescending attitude, adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and sneered. "Maybe he's the entertainment for the night." They weren't even subtle. They didn't need to be. They were used to moving through life, assuming they were better, because of their last names, their bank accounts, and their carefully curated circles of influence. Victoria glanced at Shaq's casual attire, her nose wrinkling. "Honestly, the nerve of showing up to an event like this, dressed like that." Bradley smirked. "He probably doesn't understand how an auction even works." Elliot chuckled, taking a sip of his drink. "I almost feel bad. Someone should tell him that this isn't a basketball game. No participation trophies here." They were laughing now, amused by their own pettiness. Across the room, Shaq sat back in his chair, one arm resting lazily on the backrest. He could hear the whispers, feel the stares. It wasn't the first time people had underestimated him. It wouldn't be the last. A waiter hesitated before pouring him another drink, as if unsure whether he belonged at a table among the elite. Shaq simply smiled, thanking him politely. He knew exactly what was happening. These people weren't just wealthy, they were entitled. They thrived on exclusivity, believing their money made them superior. And in their minds, Shaq, despite being a global icon, a businessman, and a self-made success, was just some guy who got lucky throwing a ball into a hoop. A new item was unveiled on stage, a sleek, custom-designed luxury pen, once owned by a world leader. The auctioneer lifted his gavel. "We shall start the bidding at $10,000. Several hands shot up instantly, including Shaq's. But instead of acknowledging his bid, the auctioneer turned to another guest. Shaq raised an eyebrow. He wasn't here just to bid. He was here for something else entirely. A lesson needed to be taught, and by the end of the night, this room would never forget it. The auction continued, but the attention in the room had already shifted. A few tables away from Shaq, three of the wealthiest and most arrogant guests in attendance were already whispering among themselves. Bradley Kensington III, a smug real estate mogul with a history of throwing money around to prove his superiority, smirked as he swirled his glass of wine. Looks like someone took a wrong turn. Sitting beside him, Victoria Hastings, a high society socialite draped in diamonds and privilege, let out a soft, mocking laugh. Poor guy. He probably thinks this is a charity dinner. Elliot Brooks, an art collector known for his condescending attitude, adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and sneered. Maybe he's the entertainment for the night. They weren't even subtle. They didn't need to be. They were used to moving through life assuming they were better because of their last names, their bank accounts, and their carefully curated circles of influence. Victoria glanced at Shaq's casual attire, her nose wrinkling. Honestly, the nerve of showing up to an event like this, dressed like that? Bradley smirked. He probably doesn't understand how an auction even works. Elliot chuckled, taking a sip of his drink. I almost feel bad. Someone should tell him that this isn't a basketball game. No participation trophies here. They were laughing now, amused by their own pettiness. Across the room, Shaq sat back in his chair, one arm resting lazily on the backrest. He could hear the whispers, feel the stares. It wasn't the first time people had underestimated him. It wouldn't be the last. A waiter hesitated before pouring him another drink, as if unsure whether he belonged at a table among the elite. Shaq simply smiled, thanking him politely. He knew exactly what was happening. These people weren't just wealthy, they were entitled. They thrived on exclusivity, believing their money made them superior. And in their minds, Shaq, despite being a global icon, a businessman, and a self-made success, was just some guy who got lucky throwing a ball into a hoop. A new item was unveiled on stage, a sleek, custom-designed luxury pen once owned by a world leader. The auctioneer lifted his gavel. Bidding starts at $20,000. Shaq casually raised his paddle. For a moment, the room went quiet. Then Bradley snickered. Oh, this is going to be good. Victoria stifled a laugh. Does he even know how bidding works? Elliot leaned forward, amused. I say we have a little fun with this. Bradley raised his paddle. 50,000. Shaq remained silent, unfazed. Victoria smirked. 75,000. Elliot, playing along, added 100,000. Shaq didn't flinch. He just sat there watching. Going once, going twice. Sold for $100,000. The gavel came down, and the crowd gave a polite round of applause as Elliot grinned smugly. Shaq simply nodded. He wasn't here to fight over a pen. He was here for something much bigger. And soon this room would learn exactly who they were dealing with. The auction moved along, but the energy in the room had shifted. The whispers had grown louder. Shaquille O'Neal sat at his table, still relaxed, still unbothered, but he could feel the judgment in the air. He had been around wealth before. He was wealthier than most people in the room. Yet here, in this exclusive space, the so-called elite saw him as an outsider. The next item up for bid, a signed vintage jersey from one of basketball's greatest legends. The auctioneer's voice echoed through the grand ballroom. We'll start the bidding at $25,000. Shaq lifted his paddle. For a second, the room went quiet. Then murmurs spread. Bradley Kensington III smirked. Oh, this I gotta see. Victoria Hastings turned toward Elliot Brooks, amused. Does he think this is a charity giveaway? Elliot chuckled. Maybe he forgot how real money works outside of the NBA. Shaq ignored them. He had spent a lifetime tuning out people like this. Do I hear 30,000? The auctioneer called. A hand shot up. Bradley grinning. 30,000, the auctioneer confirmed. Shaq, still calm, raised his paddle again. 35,000, the auctioneer announced. Bradley leaned back, laughing. Oh, this is fun. Victoria pouted mockingly. Should we let him win one? You know, as a confidence boost? Elliot smirked. Nah, let's keep it going. 40,000, Bradley declared. Shaq, unfazed, lifted his paddle once more, but the auctioneer hesitated. He glanced at Shaq, then at Bradley, as if unsure whether to acknowledge Shaq's bid. Then at Bradley, as if unsure whether to acknowledge Shaq's bid. Bradley noticed. He let out a chuckle, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. I think they're doing him a favor. Maybe they don't want him to waste all his money. A ripple of laughter spread through the guests. Shaq stayed silent. His eyes, however, sharpened. 45,000, the auctioneer confirmed, nodding toward Bradley, completely ignoring Shaq's bid. Now the entire room understood what was happening. The auctioneer had skipped Shaq. Victoria bit her lip, hiding a smirk. Oh, wow, that's awkward. Elliot barely held back his laughter. Guess someone doesn't really belong here. Shaq leaned forward slightly. Excuse me, he said, his deep voice cutting through the noise. I bid 50. The auctioneer blinked. He glanced nervously at Bradley. Bradley shook his head, amused. No need to save face, big guy. Some things are just out of reach. The condescension was thick. The smugness in Bradley's voice was the kind of arrogance only money and privilege could produce. Shaq exhaled slowly, his patience stretching thin. Do I hear 55,000? The auctioneer continued, still pretending as if Shaq's bid hadn't counted. Elliot lazily raised his hand. 55. The auctioneer jumped on it instantly. 55,000. Going once, going twice. Shaq didn't even lift his paddle this time. He just sat back, watching the game play out. Sold to Mr. Brooks. The gavel came down. Polite applause followed. Elliot leaned toward Bradley. That was way too easy. Bradley grinned. I mean, did you really think he was going to walk out of here with anything? More laughter. More whispers. Shaq could have responded. He could have humiliated them right then and there. But he didn't, because he knew something they didn't. This auction wasn't over, and neither was he. The auction was heating up. The stakes were rising, and the air buzzed with tension as bigger, more exclusive items were unveiled. Shaquille O'Neal remained seated, relaxed, watching the show. He had already been dismissed, laughed at, and ignored. But he wasn't here for petty fights. He was here to make a point. The auctioneer clapped his hands, bringing attention to the next item. Ladies and gentlemen, up next, a breathtaking, one-of-a-kind diamond necklace from the esteemed Leclerc collection, a true masterpiece of craftsmanship. We will start the bidding at $200,000. Victoria Hastings, the self-proclaimed queen of high society, lifted her paddle immediately. 200,000, the auctioneer announced. Victoria sat up straighter, flashing a smug smile at her competitors. Might as well save everyone some time, she murmured. Elliot Brooks smirked. Please, that necklace deserves a real collector. He lifted his paddle. 250,000. Victoria's eyes narrowed. She didn't like being challenged. 300,000, she countered, her voice carrying across the room. The guests watched the battle with amusement, enjoying the tension between them. 350, Elliot fired back. Victoria didn't hesitate. 400. A murmur spread through the room. The bids were climbing quickly. 450, Elliot said, sipping his wine, playing it cool. Victoria pursed her lips. She was determined to win. 500,000. The auctioneer looked around the room. Do I hear 550? Elliot leaned back, clearly weighing his options. Then he sighed dramatically and waved a hand. Go ahead, Victoria. Enjoy your little trophy. A light round of applause followed as the gavel came down. Victoria, victorious, grinned and lifted her glass of champagne. She didn't even glance at Shaq. She didn't have to. She had already written him off. The next item was unveiled. A rare painting by a world-renowned artist, a piece rumored to be worth millions. Elliot straightened in his chair. His interest reignited. Ah, now we're talking, he said. The auctioneer nodded. We will start the bidding at $1 million. Elliot wasted no time. 1 million. Another bidder across the room lifted their paddle. 1.2. Elliot chuckled. 1.5. The bidding escalated fast. 1.8. 2 million. Elliot grinned. 2.5. The other bidder hesitated, then shook his head. Sold to Mr. Brooks for $2.5 million. Polite applause followed. Elliot gave a satisfied nod, as if he had just put a child in their place. Now only one person at the table hadn't won anything yet. Bradley Kensington III. He wasn't about to be outdone. When the next item was revealed, a vintage Rolls-Royce, one of only 5 in existence, Bradley's eyes lit up. This, he said, adjusting his tie, is mine. The auctioneer smiled. We will start at $3 million. Bradley lifted his paddle instantly. 3. Another bidder called out. 3.5. Bradley shot him a sharp look. 4. The guests watched in anticipation. Victoria whispered, He's going all in. Elliot chuckled. Typical. The other bidder hesitated. 4.5? The auctioneer prompted. No response. Bradley smirked, already savoring his victory. 5 million. The room fell silent. No one else raised their paddle. Sold to Mr. Kensington for $5 million. Bradley leaned back, looking pleased with himself. Guess some things aren't for everyone, he said loudly, glancing at Shaq. Victoria laughed softly. Elliot shook his head, amused. Shaq, however, didn't react. He simply folded his hands and waited, because he knew something big was coming, something that would change the entire night. The energy in the room shifted. The high-stakes items had been bid on, the competition had been fierce, and the egos had flared. But now it was time for the main event, the grand finale. The auctioneer adjusted his cufflinks, straightened his posture, and smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at the highlight of tonight's auction, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. A hush fell over the room as two staff members stepped forward, carrying a sleek black velvet display case. The spotlight hit the stage, making the case gleam under the golden chandelier light. The anticipation was thick. Bradley Kensington III leaned forward, eager. Victoria Hastings adjusted her diamond bracelet, eyes sparkling with curiosity. Elliot Brooks set his drink down, intrigued. Shaq? He remained still, silent, observing. The auctioneer continued, drawing out the moment. This is not just an item. It is a piece of history. A dramatic pause. The audience held their breath. Slowly, the staff opened the case, revealing a one-of-a-kind luxury watch. But this wasn't just any watch. This magnificent timepiece was custom-made for one of the most influential figures of the 20th century, the auctioneer explained. Handcrafted with precision, adorned with the rarest materials, and designed as a symbol of power and legacy. A collective murmur spread through the crowd. The watch shimmered under the lights, an intricate masterpiece of gold, platinum, and sapphire, its craftsmanship unmatched. Bradley exhaled sharply. Damn! Victoria clutched her pearls. That's exquisite. Elliot's eyes darkened with pure desire. That belongs in my collection. The auctioneer let the moment sink in before finally declaring, starting bid, $2 million. Instantly, paddles shot up. $2 million, Victoria called, her voice dripping with determination. Elliot smirked. 2.5. Bradley, unwilling to be outdone, leaned back confidently. 3 million. The tension was palpable. Whispers filled the air. The richest of the rich were battling for the ultimate prize. Victoria raised her paddle again. 3.5. Elliot scoffed. 4 million. Bradley, lips curling into a smug grin, didn't even hesitate. 5 million. A sharp gasp echoed across the room. $5 million. Just like that. Victoria hesitated. She wanted it, but was it worth going higher? Elliot ran a hand through his hair, calculating. He could go up, but at what cost? The auctioneer looked around. 5 million going once. Shaq hadn't moved. The guests had all but forgotten he was even there. 5 million going twice. And then, Shaq lifted his paddle. The entire room froze. The auctioneer blinked. Sir, your bid? Shaq's voice was calm, steady, unshaken. 10 million. Silence. Complete. Utter. Silence. For the first time that evening, Bradley, Victoria, and Elliot had nothing to say. Nothing at all. The auctioneer's lips parted in shock. To 10 million? Bradley's smirk vanished. Victoria's champagne glass trembled in her hand. Elliot looked like he had swallowed glass. Shaq didn't flinch, didn't blink. He simply leaned back in his chair, waiting. The auctioneer swallowed. 10 million. Going once. No one spoke. No one moved. 10 million. Going twice. Elliot gritted his teeth. Victoria looked down, defeated. Bradley clenched his fists, furious. But none of them dared to raise their paddle. They had underestimated him, badly. The gavel came down. Sold! To Shaquille O'Neal! The room erupted into stunned murmurs. Bradley looked physically ill. Victoria forced a smile, but her envy was obvious. Elliot! He just sat there, shaking his head, speechless. Shaq, still unfazed, stood up. He wasn't done yet. The atmosphere in the grand auction hall was nothing short of electric. Every guest sat at the edge of their seat, eyes locked on the stage, waiting for the final showdown. The last item, the crown jewel of the night, was now up for bid. A one-of-a-kind luxury watch once owned by a historical icon. The anticipation was thick, and the tension between the elite bidders was about to explode. Victoria Hastings, the high society socialite, made the first move. With a confident smirk, she raised her paddle. $2 million. The auctioneer's voice rang through the hall. We have 2 million. Do I hear two? And a quack toward the stage where the charity director still held the check for his record-breaking bid. The director, a middle-aged man in a sleek tuxedo, was visibly struggling to process what had just happened. Shaq leaned in, speaking low enough that only the director could hear. Add another 2 million, he said casually. The director's eyes widened. Excuse me? Shaq smiled. You heard me. Another 2 million. Straight to the charity. A hush fell over the room once more as guests watched the scene unfold. Then the director stepped back to the microphone, his voice shaking with disbelief. Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been informed that Mr. O'Neill is donating an additional $2 million to the foundation. Gas rippled through the audience, followed by a wave of applause. Cameras flashed as people scrambled to document the moment. Bradley, still seated, slammed his drink onto the table, his face contorted in frustration. Victoria forced a smile, clapping weakly. Elliot, still bitter from his earlier loss, muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." Shaq turned to the press section, where reporters eagerly held out their microphones. One journalist called out, "Mr. O'Neill, why did you bid so high on the watch? Was it personal?" Shaq smirked, taking his time before answering. Then in a voice both smooth and deliberate, he said, "Didn't need the watch, just wanted to teach some people a lesson." The mic drop moment. The room erupted. Some guests cheered, others laughed, and some simply sat in stunned silence. Without another word, Shaq adjusted his hoodie, nodded toward the charity director, and walked toward the exit, leaving behind a legacy not just of wealth, but of humility, power, and class. The moment Shaq walked out of the auction hall, the internet exploded. Within hours, videos of his final words, "Didn't need the watch, just wanted to teach some people a lesson," spread like wildfire. Social media buzzed with praise, admiration, and utter disbelief. Shaq just humbled the rich snobs of Beverly Hills. A true legend. Money doesn't make you powerful. Character does. That mic drop was worth more than the watch. News outlets picked up the story. Shaq outbids billionaires and then donates to charity became a headline plastered across financial and entertainment websites. Talk shows debated it. Some hailed him as a role model for humility and generosity, while others, especially those in elite circles, whispered about their embarrassment. Back in the auction hall, Bradley Kensington III sat frozen, staring at the stage. His face was still flushed from the humiliation. He had spent years flaunting his wealth, believing that power meant being untouchable. But tonight he had been outclassed, not just in money but in dignity. Victoria Hastings, normally the center of attention, felt invisible for the first time in years. She had built her entire reputation on being part of the elite. Yet despite all her expensive jewelry and high society connections, she had never commanded a room the way Shaq had, with just a single sentence. Elliot Brooks, the arrogant art collector, downed the rest of his champagne in silence. He had always believed he was the smartest man in any room, but tonight he was nothing more than a background character in someone else's story. Meanwhile, Shaq wasn't celebrating. He wasn't scrolling through the social media praise or watching the news coverage. Instead, he was sitting in his hotel room, feet kicked up, watching a basketball game and eating a burger. To him, the real victory wasn't the watch, the headlines, or even the standing ovation. It was the charity. The extra $2 million he donated would fund scholarships, help struggling families, and create opportunities for people who actually needed them. That's what mattered. The next morning, a reporter caught up with him outside a gym. "Shaq, people are calling this one of the most legendary moments in auction history. What do you have to say?" Shaq chuckled. "Man, look, I've had money for a long time, but money don't make you rich. Respect does." And with that, he walked inside, leaving the world with a final lesson. True wealth isn't about what's in your bank account. It's about what's in your heart.